All right, so let's take a look at some tips for success. So we have tip number one, and if you had a guess, you might say it all starts with communication, right? So we need to ensure open communication and dialogue. And the first sub tip we have under that is establish communication methods and expectations. Utilize chat, text messaging, and phone calls in addition to email and video communication. I mean, when I look at that one, like most things, like I'm like, okay, easier said than done. When's it appropriate to use what method? I think different generations look at different types of communication and seem to have a preference for one or the other. And, most organizations and workplaces have multi-generational people working together. I mean, I think it's important that expectations part of that one, I think is important. Like, when do you use what?
You and I were actually on a call and we saw everyone having their own choice can be chaotic when you're like, oh, everyone just, however you like to get messaging, you can send messaging. I mean, just without I think the dialogue part is important, but to also have ground rules, like what do you use when? And acknowledging, like you said, there can be generational differences. There could just be, human differences. Because that's, as our life kind of changes speed, a lot of people, maybe it is texting, but is texting the right thing for every type of communication? So the part for me, yes, I just acknowledge, I think communication in pretty much all teams, relationships, groups, that's no matter what's been going on. If there was something that's not working right, a lot of times it does come down to communication. But the other part of that, and I'd be curious what your perspective is, because when you said open communication and dialogue, to me, the key is the all parties that are involved in it. The dialogue, to me, I use that and I understand that as a back and forth, like that each person has something to say and you hear what their concerns are, their preferences are, and then to hear it and then to respond, all the time working toward what are our common goals and objectives. Because we're talking about this in the context of remote work. And so that's one of the things we do know about remote work is that because you're not all sitting around the table in in physical space, you have to be very intentional. But people can assume like, oh, everybody's like I am. We're all very egocentric. You're like, oh, I like texting and I don't like to be in, you're like, that's not everybody. Some people do prefer a phone call or a video call. The other part of what you mentioned is it was all of the modalities at some point. So you might not like to talk on the phone, but there might be times where it's the best form to resolve a problem or to be able to hear what the other person's concerns are. Don't know, what's your
Yeah,
perspective on dialogue, or what did you hear there?
yeah. Well, what I was going to say is that the intentional thing perked my ears up because that's what I was thinking on the second sub point is talking about scheduling regular team meetings and individual check-ins. And I think that's very important for remote work because, like you said, like you're not going to have that impromptu passing in the hallway or coming in from the parking lot or going to a different floor in the building. Those things aren't going to happen. So you're going to have to be more intentional about, when do we get together? Like you and I work together a lot, so we kind of have a standing, once a day, let's connect and chat about things or work on different things. And it's not like we're strict like every single day we do it. If we're working on something or something comes up, we might say, hey, let's skip today, catch up tomorrow, or hey, I got a lot of stuff tomorrow, can we bump the time up or move earlier? But we have an intentional time, and even within our company we have an intentional one. We actually do once a month. Like I know a lot of companies do like once a quarter. We have like a once a month standing like company all hands meeting. And it gets moved around a lot because we got a lot of stuff going on, but it's on our schedules. We know, okay, we're gonna have that time to meet together.
Yeah, that the regular check-in, like I think that that aligns with the intentionality. because you just have to be a little more thoughtful and have a little more planning to it. That can be where some people might see that as a negative. It can also be a benefit because one of the things that I know would happen when I was fully in person, people did not have as good boundaries. They would just have this, either coming into your cubby, into your office, they see you in there and they're like, oh, it's a quick question, just a quick question. And so that pop in without the boundaries or just calling huddles like, oh, everybody in now, this afternoon, and so you could be working on a project, but you don't have much notice. And so that it can feel chaotic. So it can feel chaotic in person, and you can, if you don't have that intentionality when you're remote, you're like, okay, I don't really know what's going on here. So I think as we go through this, I know we're focused on remote work, but you're going to hear us comment back to in person because I think some people think that just being in person solves everything. And I don't, I don't buy that at all. Do not buy that. And so the other one, oh yeah, this next tip of the open communication and dialogue, this one, the do not have the half virtual, half in person. We've been doing this a really long time, and it's really difficult. And there have been people who think that that's going to solve things. They're like, oh, well, we'll just do them all at the same time and we'll save time. Well, it does not work well. And so what we would recommend is you either have that as an in-person day in the office. If you need everybody in for some type of meeting, everybody's all in, or everybody is all remote. And I do know we've worked with groups that even though they were in the same building, they would use the virtual technologies to where people didn't leave their desk and they would all just dial into the meeting, which we were like, what? And it was just quicker. They were like, it saves more time than having to everyone go to the main conference room.
Yeah, this one is interesting to me too because I know this one, but I wouldn't have put this on the list. And I'm glad that this got on the list of um, you know, the best policies to have people all virtual or all in person. Because it's not one that just comes to the top of my mind, but in experience, yeah, anytime that I've been in meetings where the majority of people were all in one room and you had a few people coming in remotely, those meetings were not very good, especially for the remote people, and even like remote people that were not, I would not describe them as meek and quiet. It was still hard for them. And I've been that person too, that remote person. And, I'm not going to be, meek and quiet. I'm probably going to be like doing this and trying to unmute and jump in. But it's hard to do that if everybody in the room's talking. And then if everybody in the room's talking and it's not a good microphone, like you don't necessarily hear something or people are whispering and you're hearing something that you don't need to hear that's disrupting from the main person that's speaking, it can be very confusing for the outside person. Like the only time that I've seen it work well is like if people are just very seasoned at the whole video communications where there is very good etiquette where everybody at the table is recognizing, okay, we got virtual people and we need to make sure we're honoring them, and it's not something that just gets bulldozed over and the remote people are constantly have to remind. It can be successful with practice, but yeah, as a general rule of thumb, I think all virtual or all in person is a good tip.
Yeah, I think the comment that caught my eye was when you said it with a seasoned group, because something that can happen, and I was working with a group that was kind of new. This was I don't even know when this was, working with video conferencing. So we were, showing how you can do bring people in remotely depending on what the local setup is. Okay, so imagine like we're all virtual. So, we're like the size of our computer. And when everyone's virtual, you're all the same size, basically, unless you go speaker view and you're just a little bit larger. And then you go down. Well, if you are coming into a conference room, depending on the size of the screen, it can be a bit science fiction, kind of dystopian, because if you do ask a question, because they could have the little box, and if it's speaker view, then you go to what 105-inch display. You're like, that's it's weird, right? I mean, that's just it. And we're so accustomed to doing video, I'm accustomed to sometimes I'm on the big screen. And so to see it through someone new to the technology's eyes, they were like, whoa, I'm not gonna, and that was the comment they said, I'm never gonna say anything because I don't want to be the person that's that large on the screen. So that's another concern. I mean, you're like, not everyone is comfortable being on what's that crazy size we have, like 105-inch display or something like that. Like that's big. That's
Mhm.
like I said, and it does have that kind of, like in a science fiction or a Marvel movie where you've got the one character that's larger than life. You are indeed, you're quite large.
Yeah, and I was also thinking a little bit about I have helped manage meetings like that before, and when it's been successful is like I've become like the person that's being the bridge between the remote and the in-person. So I'm in the room with the whole big group, but I'm watching the virtual people, or they're messaging me when they want to when they have a question or something to say, or I'm typing in the chat, does anybody have any questions or does anybody want to talk? And so then I'm helping kind of be that representative in the room, to help give them voice. And that's worked well. But again, it's like I'm having to we're having to do extra work and facilitation to make it work versus like if everybody's like just connect in from your computer, for the meeting, you don't have to really worry about that because everybody has the same seat.
Okay, this is not in our script. This is just came to me because we're having our conversation here. Now, would it work? Picture a seasoned group. Let's say the in-person group is sharing content. That might keep the speaker view from taking over the screen. So that might be a little hack if you do have to pull off a half virtual, half in person. That might work, don't you think?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like if you had the slide deck shared all the time, no matter what,
Mhm.
and kept the people smaller on like that huge screen. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was like, yeah, because whenever
It
you,
might help the people in the room too, because it is odd, like when you're staring at yourself in the conference, Yeah, yeah. Just like you said, like it's odd for the remote person to realize they're this huge body on the 105-inch. And then it's also odd for the people in the conference room to like be like kind of seeing themselves as one of the people. Yeah, it can be distracting.
well, and so I think with this, so just to kind of buttonhole, we started with open communication and dialogue. And so with that as the foundation, like even the policy of like all in person, all remote, that's kind of like I would say if you can do that, that would be best. But if you can't, then the key one of the key words we said was like season. There are more things that you need to practice and to have as your norms of interaction. And yeah, you can pull it off, like, but maybe that's one out of every three or something, so that you're by design and not default. You're like, let's think.
Yeah, I think of the word intentional again. Be intentional. Don't be like, oh, it'll be fine, and just go into the meeting and then it stinks for the remote people, which I think sometimes um, not to generalize leaders, but sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, we don't got time to figure all that out. Let's just go do the meeting." And it's like, okay, well, we're doing the meeting and it's kind of worthless for these people that we made, come into the meeting remotely because they can't really hear what's going on and can't participate.
So that wraps our open communication and dialogue. We'll move into optimizing communications.